Yes.
Tempton? Okay. Good evening,
Haji,
ladies.
please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the WZCC Mumbai chapter seminar. We have a very eminent speaker with a very interesting topic today. And I just wanted to give you the update or status of WZCC. As of now, we have 14 very active chapters globally from all corners of the world. And I think except for Africa, from all continents too. We also have 4 AROs from Southeast Asia and other places. And because of COVID, we normally hold our meetings, instead of holding them physically locally at each chapter, we normally have a webinar now, which is free and which has this advantage that anyone from any part of the world can join, depending upon the time that we have our seminar. As you all probably know, we've had multiple seminars and webinars this year. We're doing very well. We've connected with all the people. Just recently, we had the AGM, a global AGM, which was conducted by the London chapter. We will be having another function with the London chapter if COVID allows us to. We will meet in October, and then we'll have an AGM next year accordingly. Till we open up, till the world opens up and the travel becomes convenient, we will continue to have our webinars. And I think it is good because it allows us to network better than what we basically do. We don't have to really find the time, get the transport, and be physically present. So I prefer that we continue with the webinar in future as much as possible. Of course, it's always nice to meet and greet. So we will have those meetings also. And with God's grace, our Mazda's grace, we'll open up very shortly. Feel free to call our Mumbai office if you guys need anything, any inquiries, any connections, any networking issues or programs that you have. Our CEO, Aspi Atya, is always there to help you all out. And as you know, we have a ladies wing and a youth wing. The youth is doing very well. So are the ladies. We are flying high as much as we can under these circumstances. And so without much ado, I hand over to Tempton, who can formally welcome you all and then move on with, and looking forward to hearing from Mr. Jahangir. Tempton, over to you.
Thank you. I'm Tempton Dalal speaking, Chairman of the Mumbai chapter of WZCC. And I welcome each one of you viewers today. We have a wonderful speaker by the name Jahangir Ghai. He is a senior activist and in this line for more than 35 to 40 years. And he has won some of the greatest cases in Bombay, not only in Bombay, but he is well known throughout India. The other important factor is that he's a gold medalist. And as far as WZCC is concerned, it is for entrepreneurs. And I request all our Parsi brethren, ladies and gentlemen, to please join our WZCC, because if we don't help our own community members, then who will help? Our WZCC is also giving loans for starting businesses. We have started about 3 to 5 people till now. Each one has got 25 lakhs of rupees. And I'm sure today's evening webinar, each viewer is going to really remember for a very long time. And the most important thing is that in the Consumer Act, you can also yourself appear in the case. So kindly listen to what Jahangir says, because he's an extremely eminent man. And as soon as he appears, people get all sorts of different good orders in their favor. And I request Persis to formally invite our Jahangir Ghai, the main hero of today's evening. Persis, over to you.
Thank you. Right, on behalf of WZCC Mumbai chapter, I wish all our viewers a very good evening. I feel privileged to be introducing our speaker for this today's webinar, none other than the renowned consumer protection activist, Mr. Jahangir Ghai. You may have already had a glimpse of his credentials from the circular, but there is much more to his achievements and accomplishments, which I will impart. This is in addition with what Tenzin has just briefly mentioned. Jahangir Ghai is one of the senior most consumer activists based in Mumbai. He is a freelance columnist writing for various newspapers and magazines on consumer cases and consumer related issues. His columns have appeared in Lawyers Collective, Indian Express, Express Estate, Financial Express, Midday Gujarati, Enadu Times, One India, One People, Insight, and JITO World Business Magazine, all in English, Hindi, and Gujarati editions. Currently, his columns appear in the Times of India, Business Standard, and Mumbai Samachar. His question and answer column has guided consumers and helped many of them in redressing their grievances. He also spreads consumer awareness by giving talks. He has addressed several Lion clubs, Rotary clubs, JCs, the Forum of Free Enterprise, Indian Medical Association, Mumbai branch, Association of Medical Consultants, etc., and has participated in panel discussions and spoken at seminars and workshops related to consumer protection. He has also given guest lectures to school and college students as well as the teaching faculty. He has been actively associated with various consumer organizations since 1984-85, even prior to the enactment of the Consumer Protection Act. He is presently associated with Consumers Welfare Association, the Bombay Telephones Users Association, the Consumer Online Foundation, Partnership for Safe Medicines in India. He is also on the Complaints Committee of the Advertising Standard Council of India. It's called ASCI. He has been appearing before the district forums and the state commission in Maharashtra right from the inception of these tribunals in the year 1990. He has also appeared before the National Commission in a number of matters. In one instance, the National Commission on its own accord appointed him to take up and argue a matter on behalf of a litigant who was appearing in person and was unable to express himself and unable to afford legal fees. After the Supreme Court observed that telecom disputes should be referred to statutory arbitration and not filed before the consumer fora, he took up the challenge of differentiating this judgment. He single-handedly argued against all telecom service providers, right from the district forum to the National Commission, and obtained a ruling that telecom disputes can be filed under the Consumer Protection Act. The SLP challenging this decision was dismissed by the Supreme Court. He was also requested by the Maharashtra State Commission provide inputs for deciding whether limitations in respect of insurance claims should be computed from the date of the incident of loss or from the date of liquidation of claim. He was recently appointed amicus curiae by the Maharashtra State Consumer Disputes Redressal Commission to assist in deciding whether a student is a consumer, which now ruled that a student is a consumer of services rendered by educational institutions. He has filed and argued several public interest petitions before the Consumer Fora. One such case resulted in framing of criteria for superfast trains taking into account the average running speed of the train and the time taken for travel. He has also filed several writ petitions in the Bombay High Court regarding problems faced by the Consumer Fora and the litigant parties, the non-functioning of the State Consumer Protection Council, etc., and has succeeded in getting appropriate directions from the court. In recognition of his contribution to the consumer movement, he was awarded the Government of India National Youth Award for Consumer Protection, 1993. This award was presented in 1996 after a thorough scrutiny of various consumer activists of individuals at the district, state, and national levels. He has also taken up various issues regarding the Right to Information Act. In response to his appeal to the Central Information Commission, CIC, the CIC has held that in case a public authority has a right to obtain information from a private body, an applicant can approach the public authority to obtain such information regarding a private body. Thus, information which would normally not be available in the RTI Act could also be obtained in this manner. Now, I shall hand over it to Mr. Jangir Gai to explain to us what this Consumer Protection Act is all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much for, is my voice echoing?
No.
Yes, now.
No, okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to give a talk on the Consumer Protection Act. Since most people are aware through my columns and elsewhere about the provisions of the old Act, I would like to first focus on some of the provisions of the new Consumer Protection Act of 2019, which was introduced in August during the lockdown period. Since it was introduced during the lockdown period, most people are not really aware of what are the salient provisions and what are the problems which will be caused by the new Act. So I will first deal with those. Thereafter, I will move on to explaining certain judgments which are of great importance in our day-to-day life. Most of us, are not given proper services because we are not aware of our rights. Each one of us is a consumer right from the day we are born till the day we die. And yet, business houses and industrialists manipulate the individual consumer who is treated like a king when it comes to sales. But once the goods are sold and the consumer requires any service, the same consumer is like a beggar who has to run after the company for follow-up. So I'll begin with a PowerPoint presentation, which will help people understand what the consumer movement is about, what are the laws, what are the rules, and how you can enforce your rights. I'll start the screen share. Just a minute, the connectivity is a bit slow here. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay. This is the first presentation which I am giving on the Consumer Protection Act of 2019. Till now, the act which was in force was the Consumer Protection Act of 1986. So what are the new provisions which have been introduced, which will help consumers enforce their rights? One second. Okay, under the new Consumer Protection Act, a Consumer Protection Authority has been constituted, which is in addition to the consumer fora or a consumer disputes redressal tribunals, which are available under the Act for redressal of grievances. Now, what is the role of this Consumer Protection Authority? The most important role is that it will deal with complaints of a general nature regarding unfair trade practice. If an individual were to approach the consumer court for seeking redressal of his grievance for a particular unfair trade practice, it would take time, and that only that individual consumer would be able to get relief. Sometimes the time and the effort taken to obtain relief is so long that it does not become worthwhile for an individual consumer to fight for his rights. So here is the Consumer Protection Authority, which will take up the matter, investigate into the complaint, and take suitable action against a manufacturer for unfair trade practice. Another aspect is that it can also take action against misleading advertisements. Today we find celebrities who are totally bald recommending hair oils and various such things. They recommend a product, they endorse a product because they are paid for it. They do not know the efficacy of the product. And yet they mislead the consumer. Today we have got cases where people represent that a paint kills bacteria and protects against viruses. We have got advertisements that a Zodiac shirt can kill the COVID virus. To such extent, manufacturers are misleading consumers. So all these sort of complaints could be dealt with by the Consumer Protection Authority. For violation, the penalty for a first violation is up to 10 lakhs. And in case of repeated violation, the penalty would extend up to 50 lakhs. Sorry, just a second. Okay. Now, under the new act, the jurisdiction of the consumer forum, the pecuniary jurisdiction, has been enhanced. Earlier, under the old act, complaints at the district level could be up to rupees 20 lakhs, state commission 1 crore, and exceeding 1 crore, it would have to go to the National Commission. Under the new act, the limit has been revised. Claims up to 1 crore go before the district forum. If the claim, the value rather, of the consideration paid for a service is up to 10 crores, it would go to the state commission. And anything exceeding 10 crores would go to the National Commission. Now here there is a considerable apprehension because it is only the actual consideration, the monetary amount which has been paid for a particular service, which will govern the jurisdiction. The compensation which is claimed is not to be added to the value of the claim for the purpose of determining pecuniary jurisdiction. So let us take an example. A person goes to a hospital, the hospital bill is of rupees 1 lakh. There is some negligence and he wants to claim a compensation of 10 crores. What would determine the jurisdiction under the new? It would only be the amount which he has paid as consideration to the hospital. So even if he's claiming 10 crores, the complaint would still have to be filed at the level of the district consumer commission, at the district level. It would not go to the state commission or to the national commission as it used to go earlier. Now, what are the implications of this? No doubt it has brought justice closer to the doorstep of the consumer because the claim can be filed at the district level where he resides. But conversely, almost all the complaints which were earlier spread and divided between the district, state, and national levels will all get congested and come down to the district level. The apprehension is that once the courts open up and start functioning, there will be so many cases that it will simply be impossible for the consumer commissions to deal with those matters. There is lack of a proper accommodation. Even now, files are piling over in the corridors. The claim is increased fivefold from 20 lakhs to 1 crore. So what will happen remains to be seen. But the future, according to me, does not seem too very good unless the concept of pecuniary jurisdiction is amended. Territorial jurisdiction has also been changed under the new act. Earlier, it was possible to file a complaint only where the opposite party resided, that means the service provider, or where a cause of action arose. The place of residence or the place of work of the complainant had no bearing on the issue. Now, the place of residence of the complainant has also been vested with the jurisdiction to entertain complaints. This may seem attractive, but it will still give a considerable scope for people to harass and try to extort money. Let us consider a case of a patient who is, say, located in some small rural district area, remote interior village, and the local, say, health clinic, the government dispensary is not able to treat him. He is brought to a tertiary care center in a city like Mumbai. After he is discharged, he can file even a bogus complaint in some godforsaken district like Gadchiroli and claim compensation because he resides there. What would the doctor do then? It would be difficult for him to go to that remote place, find suitable accommodation, engage a lawyer, and contest the matter. So while the provision, the amendment is good, there are not enough checks and balances to protect against its misuse. The period of appeal earlier was 30 days. Under the new act, the appeal from district to state level, the period has been enhanced to 45 days. But surprisingly, the period for appealing from the state commission to the remote national commission, let us say from Chennai to Delhi, the appeal period is still 30 days. District to state is 45 days, but state to national is 30 days. National to Supreme Court is also 30 days. But the best part here is that frivolous appeals will not be filed by parties in most cases, because in order to file an appeal, it has now been made mandatory to deposit at least 50% of the award before the state commission or the district forum. So a person cannot just file an appeal and escape making payment. The penalty for non-compliance of the order of the consumer fora has also been amended. The period for imprisonment was earlier 1 month to 3 years. There has been no change under the new act in the period of imprisonment which can be given, the period still remains minimum 1 month and maximum 3 years. But the fine which can be imposed for non-compliance of the order has been increased. The minimum fine is now 25,000 rupees, which can extend to 1 lakh. Earlier it was 2,000 to 10,000. Now it is 25,000 to 1 lakh. And the party which does not comply with the order can be imprisoned. The method for recovery of the amount awarded was originally under the Initial Act of 86. The method was to recover the money as dues through a decree of a civil court, like a decree of a civil court. Consumers found this tedious because they had to approach the civil court. So after some time, taking into consideration the consumer experience, the act was amended and the awarded amount was recovered as arrears of land revenue by the collector. This system was working very smoothly and very well. But now, under the new act, very, very unfortunately, this system of recovering the amount through the collector as arrears of land revenue has been discarded, and it has reverted back to executing the decree of a civil court. So this is going to put consumers to a lot of problem. When it comes to the Consumer Protection Authority, which is quite distinct from the Commission, the directions which are given by the Consumer Protection Authority, if they are violated, the imprisonment can be for up to 6 months or a fine of 20 lakhs or both. In the initial stage, for the initial offense, this offense can be compounded. It is a criminal offense. It can be compounded, which we can term as maybe a settlement by paying an amount, like we pay a compounding charge to the constable when we have caught jumping a signal. So same way a criminal matter can be settled or compounded. But if the offense is repeated within a period of 3 years, then compounding is not possible, it is not permissible, and criminal prosecution is a must. Okay, now I'll come to certain important decisions which will help and guide us in our day-to-day life. We must all be aware of what are the laws so that we can enforce our rights. Currently, I have been flooded with queries as to what is the situation for getting refund of the flights which are cancelled due to the COVID-19 lockdown. The Supreme Court has bifurcated the bookings into those which were made during the lockdown, and the flights were also to take off during the lockdown but could not because the lockdown got extended. And the second category, where let us say people had booked a flight in advance for a holiday or something, and the flight could not depart because of the lockdown. So in the first case, the booking is made during the lockdown. In the second case, the booking is made in advance. The Supreme Court considered the case because the airlines also claimed that they were in a financial problem as they had to maintain the aircraft, pay their staff, look after various overheads. The Supreme Court said that full refund would have to be given within 15 days if the booking is made during the lockdown and the flight has also got cancelled during the lockdown. But for the second case where the bookings were made in advance, the Supreme Court allowed the airline, gave it an option, a choice, whether to refund the amount or to buy time and issue a credit note. The credit note would be transferable, so though the ticket may have been booked by me, if somebody else wants to travel, I can transfer it to the other person. Because the money is lying with the airline, the value of the credit note would increase by 0.5% per month. It would amount to roughly say 6% interest, you can say. 0.5% per month up to 30th June 2020. And thereafter at 0.75% per month till 31st March 2021. If the credit is not utilized by the end of March, then the full value would have to be refunded. The entire value of the air ticket would have to be refunded. I've mentioned the case title also, the citation. The next case relating to travel is where airlines overbook the flight, issue confirmed tickets, and then deny boarding. The reason which is given is that it is an internationally accepted practice, industry practice, to overbook an airline. So there is no deficiency in service. This matter went to the National Commission, and the Commission observed that even though it may be an industry practice, it may be internationally prevalent, but overbooking, indiscriminate overbooking, results in hardship to flyers with confirmed seats, because though they have confirmed tickets, they are still not allotted a seat in the aircraft. So the Commission suggests that instead of overbooking a flight, it would be better to impose stringent conditions for cancellation of confirmed tickets. Penalize those, in short, penalize those if they take a confirmed ticket and still do not travel. But those who have a confirmed ticket cannot be deprived from traveling. The Commission observed and concluded that the airline has a sense of duty and liability towards its passengers with confirmed tickets, and this cannot be ignored while overbooking. It held that the airline is liable to compensate a passenger who has been denied boarding. I've mentioned the case title, citation, Air France versus O.P. Srivastava. This is a very interesting case. All of us go to restaurants or hotels, and at least in a metropolitan city like Mumbai, the biggest problem is to get parking. So what is done by the restaurant or the hotel is that it gives an incentive to its customer, to the guest, that we have valet parking. You do not have to bother about your vehicle, where it is to be parked. You can come and enjoy your meal or whatever you want to do without the botheration of searching for parking space. There are instances when the vehicle which is handed over to the hotel staff or the valet meets with an accident or goes totally missing. There are instances where it has been stolen. A case was filed in the consumer court for us. And the hotel's defense was that it is a free service we are providing. Whether a person comes walking, comes in a chauffeur-driven car, comes by bus, how he comes, we don't charge anything extra. We don't differentiate in the tariff while charging the guest. So since this is a free service, valet parking, there is no liability on the part of the hotel management. The National Commission rejected this argument, and it said that this is part of the service to attract the customer. The cost is built into the cost of the service. And when a vehicle is given, there is a contract of bailment which requires the vehicle to be returned back to the owner in safe condition. If the vehicle is lost or damaged, the restaurant or the hotel would be guilty of deficiency in service and would be liable to compensate the customer. This was in the case of Taj Mahal Hotel versus United India Insurance. Now I'll come to insurance matters. Most of us believe that the LIC agent, the insurance agent, gets commission because of the policy we take through him. Yes, he does get commission. So we expect that this same agent must give us certain service. Why is he pocketing this commission if he's not there to give service? So we expect him to collect a premium from us and deposit it with the insurance company at the time of renewal of the policy. We term him as an insurance agent. So the layman thinks that he is the insurance company's agent, and once you hand over a check to him, your responsibility is over. Is this assumption correct? The answer is no, absolutely a clear no, because the agency contract between the insurance company and the agent prevents an agent from taking the premium from the customer, from the insured. Since he is prohibited from taking the premium, he is not acting as the insurance company's agent when you hand over a check to him. He is acting as your agent. Just as you would hand over a check, maybe send it through your pune, through your colleague, through your family member. Same way, the agent acts as your representative when carrying the check from your place to the insurance company. God forbid, if the agent, for some reason, something suddenly crops up and he loses the check, or he forgets to deposit it with the insurance company, it is your policy which would lapse. The insurance company cannot be held liable. So it is always advisable to ensure that you post or you courier your renewal premium rather than hand it over to the agent. Even if you can't go and pay the premium, courier it, but see that it reaches the insurance company in time. This is a judgment of the Supreme Court, Harshad Shah versus LIC, where the Supreme Court held that the policy had lapsed, the agent does not have any liability, and neither does the insurance company have any liability because the policy had lapsed. Though the check was handed over in time, the agent had failed to deposit it with the insurance company. The other cases, the maximum number of cases are against Mediclaim policies, claims under Mediclaim policies being rejected. And the commonest reason is that the claim was not filed within the prescribed period of 15 days or 30 days. Now, is this contention correct? The policy does have a clause that the claim must be lodged within 15 days or 30 days. It varies from insurance company to insurance company, from policy to policy. But we have to remember that a claim is divided into three parts: the pre-hospitalization medical checkups, the actual hospitalization and treatment, and after discharge, the post-hospitalization expenses, which are covered up to 30 days or 60 days, depending from company to company. So after being discharged, are you expected to lodge two claims with the insurance company? One up to the date of discharge, and the second for the treatment post-discharge. The insurance company wants you to do that. Why? Because when you get the bulk of the amount for a hospitalization and the post-hospitalization claim is ignored, it is not really worthwhile you're fighting out for that small amount. So in many cases, the post-hospitalization treatment expenses are not paid. You have every right to wait and file one composite claim for the entire pre-hospitalization, hospitalization, and post-hospitalization. Can the insurance company say that you have committed a breach of the policy because you have failed to lodge the claim in time? This matter is very well settled by the State Commission and the National Commission that submitting the claim within a period of 15 to 30 days is only for expeditious settlement. In any case, the insurance company never settles it expeditiously, but it is meant for expeditious settlement of the claim. And if the claim is delayed, that cannot be a ground for refusing to honor it whenever it is lodged later. When insurance companies delay the claim, delay making payment, the insurance company is earning interest on the amount which it is meant to disburse to you. So, for delayed payment, the insurance company requires you to pay, is required to pay 2% more than the bank rate prevailing as on 1st April at the beginning of the financial year. So if the bank rate is say 4%, the insurance company would have to pay at 6%. Many times insurance companies refer to various interdepartmental instructions, circulars and guidelines to say that the claim is not payable. In fact, there are certain statutory guidelines also which are framed by the IRDA. The question is, which arose in the Supreme Court, was whether these circulars, guidelines, and statutory guidelines also would be binding on a consumer or not. And the court held that unless it is incorporated in the policy, it would not be binding. The basis of the contract is in the insurance policy which governs both the parties. So if it is not in the contract of insurance, then it cannot be used to the detriment of the consumer by the insurance company. Also, insurance companies, particularly since there are entrepreneurs here, when there is a claim, the insurance company does not want to pay you your full claim, but insists that you give a full and final discharge. Is this legally correct? Once you sign full and final discharge, then you are absolving the insurance company of all further liability. You cannot claim the amount. So, this is held to be an unfair trade practice. You have to ask the insurance company to release the amount to the extent it is admitted in the claim. The balance amount which is disputed can be decided by the court. Now, what if the insurance company refuses to settle the claim? Then by an interim application, the admitted amount is ordered to be released by the court and the dispute continues for a balance amount as and when the case gets decided. There are certain genetic disorders which are excluded under the Act. You may or may not be aware that you have such a genetic disorder, and it may become noticeable much later in life. The Supreme Court has, sorry, the Delhi High Court has held that genetic disorders are, exclusion of genetic disorders are opposed to public policy, and the claim would have to be paid. Genetic disorders cannot be excluded from the purview of the policy. Another very interesting aspect is, what is an accident? Normally we consider that an accident is something like a road accident, something suddenly happening. Events like lightning, sunstroke, cold wave, heat wave, earthquake, we consider these to be acts of nature. We don't consider these to be accidental. But the legal interpretation of accident means there should be something sudden and violent which occurs externally. So an accident caused by external violence and visible means. So when a policy covers accident and a person dies due to lightning, dies due to sunstroke, dies due to cold wave, develops breathing difficulty at high altitudes, then it amounts to an accident under a policy, and the accident benefit is also payable. Now it is well settled that uniform definition of pre-existing disease is 4 years. So if a person has 4 claim-free years, then all the earlier existing diseases also get covered under the policy. At the time of renewal, insurance companies cannot arbitrarily refuse to renew a policy or unilaterally change the terms and conditions. At the time, though the policy is issued for 1 year, the Supreme Court has interpreted that a renewal means an extension of the same policy for a further period of 1 year. The terms and conditions would be identical. They cannot be changed unless specific consent is obtained. Where people lodge a fraudulent claim or inflate it, many times people try to capitalize on that, on a claim, on an incident, on an accident. And though the claim amount may be less, they try to improve upon the whatever is insured to reinstate it, or rather get better or newer products, or to inflate the claim amount. If the insurance company treats it as a fraudulent claim, then even the amount which you are entitled to can be repudiated on the ground that the claim has been fraudulently inflated. So please ensure that you restrict your claim to the genuine loss and do not inflate it. The law provides an optional remedy of approaching the insurance ombudsman. But if the award of the ombudsman is not acceptable to you, you can go to the consumer forum. The award of the ombudsman is binding on the insurance company, but not on the consumer. And please be very careful. Of late, insurance companies have started bluffing people, saying that we have lost your original proposal form. Please fill up a fresh proposal form and give it to us. If you believe this at face value and you submit a fresh proposal form, that proposal is misused to issue a fresh policy on different terms and conditions, saying you have applied for a fresh policy. So if you are asked to fill up a fresh proposal form, for God's sake, please do not believe it and do not submit any fresh proposal to the insurance company. The other area where there are many complaints, the next largest industry where there are complaints is housing and builders. Though in civil law, a contract is required under a Consumer Protection Act, the courts have interpreted that even if there is no formal agreement for sale of a flat, a mere receipt of payment would acquire the essence of a contract. The correspondence would acquire the essence of a contract. Many times builders come out with lovely, beautiful brochures advertising various properties. And when the flat is given, the advertised amenities are not available. The advertised amenities are not mentioned in the agreement. Can a purchaser file a consumer complaint? The answer is yes, because the advertisement brochure becomes the basis on which the person enters into a contract for a purchase of the flat. The agreement for a flat is restricted to his flat and the amenities in the flat. But for general surrounding amenities, the brochure would form the basis of the contract. And if there is a deviation, a person can get justice from the consumer court. Any oppressive term in a contract can also be struck down by the consumer court. There are times when a builder says that if you cancel the booking, he would be entitled to forfeit the amount. Now, most of the times, it is the builder who delays possession. If you cancel the booking because the builder has delayed it, why should the builder benefit by his own negligence? So, an unfair contract can be struck down. A builder cannot change the sanctioned layout once an agreement for the sale is entered into. So, if he wants to deviate from the plan, he would require the written consent of each and every flat purchaser. Amended plans by the municipal corporation without taking the consent of the flat purchasers have been held to be illegal. So even if the corporation sanctions an amended plan, but the flat purchaser has not agreed to such amendment, it becomes illegal. To overcome this, builders had tried to obtain a blanket consent in advance, saying that we will consent to any change in the layout or construction. The Bombay High Court held that such a blanket consent without knowledge of what is the exact specific alteration which would be effected would not be legal, and it would nullify the objectives of Maharashtra Ownership Flats Act. A blanket consent has been held to be invalid. Parking spaces are rampantly sold by builders. There are umpteen judgments. I've given listed here 5 judgments. Parking space cannot be sold by the builder. It is the society which will have to allocate parking and charge parking charges for the allocation of such space. Carpet area to built up area, builders manipulate the ratio. There have been instances where a carpet area is 50% of the actual built up area. There is no definition to show what should be the super built up area and what should be the carpet area. So the Competition Commission tried to find out whether there was any norm or definition, and ultimately concluded that there was no such provision to define super built up area. The rule of reason must prevail, and the difference between carpet area to super built up area cannot exceed more than 33%. Builders also assign their development rights. Many times you enter into a contract with one builder, he later gets another builder and he says, now you deal with the next builder. The law is very clear that the first builder with whom you enter into a contract is liable, and also the subsequent builder, both are jointly and severally liable because the assignment of development rights is given, but the responsibility cannot be given a go by. An unregistered or a proposed society cannot file a complaint. Many times what happens is that people get together, say proposed society, and file a case. Is this permissible? The answer is no, because an unrecognized, unregistered society is not a legal entity in the eyes of law. But an unregistered association of persons, individuals, can join together and file a complaint because they are bound by a common cause of action. Their objective is same. Complaints regarding deficiency in service by a cooperative housing society can also be filed under the Consumer Protection Act in addition to the cooperative courts. For banking, you will find always on a bank check. How much time do I have? Can somebody tell me how much more time do I have?
7 minutes.
Okay. Okay. It is always mentioned on the checkbook that the account holder is responsible for the safe custody of his checks. Now, most businessmen or entrepreneurs have an accountant. The checkbook is in the custody of the accountant. Sometimes even others keep that checkbook lying around. Supposing a check is obtained from the checkbook and it is forged, the signature is forged, can the bank take a defense that the check is from the book given to you, you were responsible for its safe custody, because you did not take that care, there was a forgery and your account is debited, the bank is not responsible? The National Commission as well as the Supreme Court have held that the bank has a responsibility of comparing the signature. Just because a checkbook is left lying about does not mean that the bank has to make payment of a forged check. So the bank cannot escape its liability. Banks also try to exercise lien of anything which is in their custody. Now let us say you have a fixed deposit already with the bank. Then you have taken a loan for your business. The fixed deposit is not given as a collateral security. If you default in payment of the loan, can the bank refuse to make payment of the fixed deposit, saying it as a general right of lien? The National Commission has held that lien can be exercised only in respect of goods bailed for a particular purpose. If there is no bailment, if the fixed deposit receipt is not given as guarantee for loan repayment, then that cannot be used by the bank. The bank cannot refuse to make payment on that fixed deposit. It does not have general right of lien. The bank is also responsible for a customer's safety on the premises. If some thief comes and snatches money and there is no security guard in the premises who tries to help the victim, it amounts to a deficiency in service. The bank is liable. But the moment the customer steps out of the bank premises, then it is the customer's responsibility. Before I end, I'd like to just narrate one humorous incident, a true life incident. There was a person who had gone to a prominent 5-star hotel in Mumbai, and he was sipping. He had ordered a peg of Old Monk rum and he was sipping it. While he was sipping it by the poolside, a cockroach came and landed on his table. And he was very upset. He called the waiter, he complained the cockroach was shooed off. And then he wrote on the bill, had the company of a cockroach on the dining table. He complained to the management after returning back. His complaint was ignored. His reminders were ignored. And then he wanted to know what to do. So I said, ask for a refund and see. A five-star hotel is at least supposed to respond to you. So he wrote back saying that I want a refund of the money. The moment he asked for a refund, the hotel wrote back saying that money cannot be refunded because you have consumed your peg of old monk rum. A case was filed in the consumer court and we took a stand that the peg of old monk rum, we divide the cost of the bottle by 12 pegs. The cost of one peg is X rupees. As against that, a five-star hotel charges X plus something for the ambience and service it provides. And that ambience does not include a cockroach. So let us say if the cost of the old monk rum, peg of old monk, is 50 rupees and the hotel has charged 500 rupees, then the hotel can appropriate 50 rupees and the balance 450 has to be refunded because that is for the ambience, which does not include a cockroach. The moment the case was filed, the hotel realized, came forward and settled the matter. So that is the power of the consumer court. Thank you. If there are any questions, I'll answer them.
Hi, Jahangir. This is Jamshed Mistry. Good to
Haji.
see you.
Same here. How are you?
Well, there are two questions actually. One is with regard to Mediclaim. The question is from which period of lodging the Mediclaim is the company liable to settle it, and from what time does interest become payable? That is the first question.
Normally, it is considered that maximum about 4 months is considered a reasonable period for settling the claim. So if there is delay beyond that period, then the company becomes liable to make payment of interest.
Great. There are two other questions, but I'll club them because they are connected. The question is that in the current scenario, are consumer cases being heard online? And
No, they are. In fact, the State Commission is without a president and 2 members, and it hardly has any facility. It does hear online, but that is only for the sake of record, for showing that it's functioning on paper. But actually, it is not functioning.
I see. And the corollary to this question was that is there a government online portal for filing complaints?
The National Commission and State Commission, there is a portal where you can file complaints. But the unfortunate part is that all the documents have to be scanned and the size of the file has certain limitations in terms of the GB which can be uploaded. So small cases can be filed and uploaded, whereas big and complicated matters becomes very difficult. And you have to scan all those documents, you have to file them and also send hard copies. And ultimately, when it comes to hearing, it's nothing much unless the other side also consents to an online hearing.
Thank you.
Can I ask one?
Yeah,
Sorry.
please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Can I ask one question, please? Jahangir, insurance ombudsman is a quasi-judicial authority, or the person who presides over the ombudsman is a past judge or past from the consumer court?
It is an internal grievance redressal mechanism by the General Insurance Council. So it is.
How is he selected?
In most cases, I think the first ombudsman was very good. He was a retired judge. After that, it is mostly ex-chairman and managing directors, CMDs of public sector companies who are given a plum posting. And my observation is that the sort of culture which you are fighting is more deeply embedded in the attitude of the insurance ombudsman. For instance, this is my personal experience, which I'm quote citing, since both you and Jamshed are lawyers, we can cite a judgment even in the Supreme Court. But when I cited a judgment before the ombudsman, and of course, his orders are subject to, can always be questioned in a consumer court, but still he tells me, you should not be citing any judgments. You are insulting me? Do you think I can't think on my own? Do you think I require the Consumer Forum's reasoning that I should go by that? So please don't cite judgments. I had to tell him very bluntly, I'm doing my duty, I am citing it. Whether you consider it or not is up to you, and put an end to it. But this is the sort of attitude which they have. It's terrible. And if it's an LIC chairman, then he's anti-general insurance. If it's a general insurance company, CMD who is appointed as ombudsman, he's anti-LIC.
But don't you think by and large they must be favoring the insurance company because they have been with the insurance company for a considerable period of time?
If at all they can favor the insurance company, they try to do it. In certain cases where I find that the case is very, I mean, if there's a gray area and they find that a party is quite strong and very firm, then they try to find a via media. I would, if we have 2 minutes, I'll just share one instance with you. There were 4 identical cases filed before the ombudsman. And in all the cases, the issue was that the claim which had been lodged was not lodged within a period of 30 days. It was under a policy by the General Practitioners Association, medical practitioners, a group policy. All the 4 doctors who were aggrieved by the decision filed individual complaints before the ombudsman. I was representing one of the doctors. And when I argued vehemently, he granted, the doctor whom I was representing was granted 50% of the claim amount. And the word used was that the claim cannot indefinitely be kept pending. Some shutter has to be drawn from some point of time. But still, there is nothing in the policy which prevents him from filing a claim later. So he was awarded 50%. The other 3 doctors' claims were rejected by the ombudsman. Now, those 3 doctors, because their claim was rejected, they came to me for filing a case in the Consumer Forum. The doctor whom I represented, I suggested you file a case. He said, no, at least the others have not got anything. I've at least got something. So let me forget about it. The 3 doctors who had lost before the ombudsman, their cases were allowed by the Consumer Forum in toto, the entire claim, with interest, compensation, and costs. So you can conceive, how can you have the same ombudsman deciding the same case, identical, but then if he feels that it will be challenged, then he tries to see that the insurance, correct, the liability is minimized. I'm not happy with the functioning of the ombudsman.
Great. Thank
you.
Thank you so much, Jahangir. This has been truly a very, very lucid and, even as, although this is not my personal area of practice, but, listening to you is deeply, deeply knowledgeable. And, you've really highlighted every aspect from not only the legal perspective, but also, and I think importantly for our, audience, areas ranging from, travel, valet parking, the role of the insurance agent, and housing, and then banking. I think that, and especially the last incident, I think every time we go to a 5-star hotel and anyone orders a peg of rum, we'll remember your
cockroach.
So on.
You want us to search for a cockroach, Jamshed?
I mean, Jahangir is the best.
I'm saying about the incident which he talked at Taj Mahal Hotel,
No, no, not
cockroach
Taj
which was
Mahal,
found.
not Taj Mahal. It was a different hotel.
Different hotel. Acha.
Anyway, so formally, let me thank you on behalf of WZCC Mumbai chapter, especially on behalf of Chairman Temtan Dalal and all of us members and all the rest who have attended. It was really, really wonderful, and we hope to keep hearing from you, because we know that the Consumer Protection Act is an act which is ever changing and ever growing. And as they say, that famous saying, "Thanda matlab Coca-Cola, consumer protection matlab Jahangir ka hai." Thank you very, very much, Jahangir. Good night,
Thanks a
everybody.
million times.
Thank
Thank
Thanks
you
a
very
lot.
much, Jahangir. Thanks
Thanks
a
a
lot.
lot. Bye. Good
Thank you,
night.
Jahangir.
God
Good
bless
night.
you. God
Thank you
bless
very
you.
much, Jahangir.
Thanks so very much. Thank you very much, Jahangir.